In a bustling urban neighborhood, a resourceful and kind-hearted teen, despite facing hardships, makes an unexpected gesture by paying for groceries for a distraught woman. The very next day, he awakens to a life he never imagined when a mysterious benefactor turns him into an overnight millionaire. As his sudden fortune attracts new opportunities and unforeseen challenges, he must learn to navigate wealth, confront hidden agendas, and stay true to the values that defined his initial act of kindness. A weathered brass key turns in a lock that hasn't opened in years. Inside, faded photographs line dusty shelves. Memories suspended in time. 17-year-old Elijah stands in the doorway of what was once his grandmother's room, her absence still a physical ache even 3 years later. He touches the tarnished locket around his neck, her final gift. Sometimes, the smallest choices echo through lifetimes. Her voice whispers in his memory as rain patters against the window of their small apartment. Outside, the city lights blur through the downpour, a tapestry of possibilities just beyond reach. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sunrise in Oakwood Heights brought little comfort to the Franklin household. The neighborhood, once a vibrant community where neighbors knew each other's names and children played freely, now stood as a testament to urban neglect. Faded storefronts with security grates, pothole-riddled streets, and the occasional flash of police lights had become the backdrop of Elijah Franklin's young life. Elijah woke before his alarm, as he always did. The habit had formed during his grandmother's final months when he dries early to check on her, adjust her pillows, and make sure her medications were organized for the day. Now, 3 years later, the habit remained. A phantom limb of responsibility that wouldn't let go. The apartment was quiet, save for the distant rumble of the subway and the steady drip from the kitchen faucet that no amount of tightening would fix. At 17, Elijah moved through the cramped space with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been caring for himself and others for far too long. His mother's bedroom door remained closed. Alicia Franklin worked the night shift at Memorial Hospital, cleaning rooms and changing linens while patients slept. She wouldn't be home until after Elijah left for school, their lives operating in parallel, occasionally intersecting for brief, tired moments over dinner or weekend mornings. Elijah pulled open the refrigerator door, the light inside flickering, before steadying. Half a carton of eggs, some milk, approaching its expiration date, and leftovers from the community center's program where he volunteered. He cracked 2 eggs into a bowl, whisking them with a fork as he mentally calculated the week's expenses. His part-time job at Wilson's corner store paid just above minimum wage, and his mother's hospital work barely covered rent. The scholarship offers that had started arriving in the mail represented a future that seemed simultaneously within reach and impossibly distant. As he cooked, Elijah glanced at the small shelf above the stove, his grandmother's collection of well-worn recipe cards and a framed photograph of the 3 of them, Elijah, his mother, and Grandma May, taken during better times. May Franklin's smile remained the brightest element in the cramped kitchen, her wisdom the foundation upon which Elijah built his days. "Remember, baby," she would say, her hands steady even as the rest of her body began to fail. "Kindness costs nothing, but its absence costs everything." The memory warmed him more than the eggs now steaming on his plate. He ate quickly, packed his school books, and scribbled a note for his mother. "Lunch in the fridge. We'll pick up groceries after work. Love you." Outside, Oakwood Heights was awakening. Mr. Patterson, a Vietnam veteran who had lived in the building for 40 years, nodded to Elijah from his usual spot on the front stoop. "Morning, young blood," he called, his voice gravelly from decades of cigarettes. "Sky's looking better today." "Morning, Mr. Patterson," Elijah replied, glancing upward at the strips of blue breaking through the usual grey. "You need anything from the store later?" "Nah, my daughter's coming by," he said, though they both knew she rarely did. "You keep moving forward, hear me? Got that brain of yours to put to use." This was their ritual. Mr. Patterson, who had watched Elijah grow from a boisterous child to a serious young man, offering encouragement disguised as casual conversation. Elijah had learned that the older residents of Oakwood Heights expressed care through such seemingly minor exchanges, a community language of survival and hope. The walk to Lincoln Carter High School took 23 minutes at Elijah's pace. He passed familiar landmarks, the community garden built on what had once been an abandoned lot, the barbershop where local politics were debated with the same passion as basketball scores, and the corner where his childhood friend Marcus had been shot 2 years ago, a memorial of stuffed animals and weather-beaten photographs still marking the spot. School represented both refuge and challenge for Elijah. Inside its walls, he excelled. AP classes, debate team, and a quiet reputation as someone who could be counted on. Outside those walls, the world seemed determined to rewrite his story according to statistics and stereotypes. Ms. Rivera, his AP, English teacher, greeted him as he entered first period. "Elijah, I wanted to talk to you about your essay. The committee's deadline for the Future Scholarship is next week." "I'm still working on it," he replied, sliding into his desk. "Just trying to get the conclusion right." What he didn't say was that the essay prompt, "Describe your greatest challenge and how it has prepared you for academic success," felt like an invitation to perform his hardships for a panel of judges. How could he compress his grandmother's death, his mother's exhaustion, or the weight of being the one who makes it out into 500 words that wouldn't sound like every other striving kid from a difficult neighborhood? "You don't have to perfect it," Ms. Rivera said, as if reading his thoughts. "Just make it true." The morning passed in a blur of classes, Elijah moving between the worlds of calculus theorems, historical analyses, and literary interpretations, with the adaptability that had become his hallmark. During lunch, he sat with his small circle of friends, Zoe, whose artistic talents had already earned her a pre-acceptance to RISD, Darius, whose basketball skills might be his ticket to college, and Tasha, whose razor-sharp wit masked a home life even more precarious than Elijah's. "You working today?" Tasha asked, sliding her untouched apple toward him in a gesture they all pretended not to notice. "Yeah, right after school until closing," Elijah replied. "Mr. Wilson's nephew is sick again." "Again?" Zoe rolled her eyes. "That nephew is sick, more than he's healthy. Or maybe Wilson just knows you'll never say no." "It's fine," Elijah shrugged. "I need the hours anyway." "For college?" Darius asked, though they all knew the answer. "For everything," Elijah said simply. The afternoon bells eventually released them, and while his friends headed to various activities, art club for Zoe, basketball practice for Darius, and the public library for Tasha, whose apartment was often too chaotic for studying, Elijah made his way to Wilson's corner store. The familiar bell above the door announced his arrival. The store, a neighborhood fixture for 3 decades, smelled of cleaning products, slightly overripe produce, and the incense Mr. Wilson sometimes burned near the register. It wasn't much. Just 6 narrow aisles stocked with essentials, a small produce section, and a counter where locals could pay bills or send money transfers. "There he is," Mr. Wilson called from behind the counter. A broad-shouldered man in his 60s with salt and pepper hair and reading glasses perpetually perched on the end of his nose. Gerald Wilson had employed 3 generations of neighborhood teenagers. "Thought you might not make it. Said I would." "Didn't I?" Elijah replied, already reaching for the green apron hanging by the storeroom door. "That you did. Register 2 needs a new receipt roll, and the delivery from central distribution came in this morning. Some of those cereal boxes need pricing." Elijah nodded, falling into the familiar rhythm of the store. Over the past 2 years, he had learned every aspect of its operation, from inventory management to handling difficult customers to the precise way Mr. Wilson liked the shelves, organized alphabetically within categories. No exceptions. The afternoon crowd was typical. Mothers with young children grabbing last-minute dinner ingredients, elderly residents who came as much for conversation as for groceries, and the after-school rush of kids buying chips and sodas. Elijah greeted the regulars by name, helped Mrs. Delgado find the cane sugar that had been moved to a different aisle, and gently but firmly asked a group of middle schoolers to take their rowdiness outside. By 6 o'clock the store had quieted. Elijah was restocking the dairy case when the bell above the door chimed again. The woman who entered was unfamiliar. Mid-40s perhaps, wearing a charcoal grey suit that looked expensive even to Elijah's untrained eye. She moved with the slight hesitation of someone in unfamiliar territory, consulting her phone before walking purposefully toward the pharmacy section. Mr. Wilson approached her. "Can I help you find something, ma'am?" "I'm looking for cold medicine," she replied, her voice tight. "Non-drowsy, if you have it." "Aisle 4. Right side," Mr. Wilson directed her. "Elijah can show you." Elijah led the woman to the modest selection of over-the-counter medications. "The orange box is probably what you're looking for," he suggested. "It's what my mum uses when she has to work through a cold." The woman nodded, selecting the medicine without really looking at it. Up close, Elijah noticed the redness around her eyes, the slight smudge in her otherwise perfect makeup. She seemed distracted, checking her watch repeatedly. As they approached the register, the woman's phone rang. She answered immediately, turning slightly away as she spoke. "Yes, I'm just picking up some medicine." "No, the meeting ran late, and I couldn't get back uptown in time." "I know, Richard. I know what the doctor said." Her voice broke slightly. "I'll be there as soon as I can." She ended the call, blinking rapidly as she set her items on the counter. The cold medicine, a bottle of water, and a small package of tissues. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened her purse. "That's $16.87, Mr. Wilson said. The woman's searching became more frantic. She emptied the contents of her purse onto the counter. Lipstick, keys, business cards, but no wallet. "I must have left my wallet in the cab." Tears welled in her eyes. "I'm sorry, I can't." She began gathering her things, movements increasingly desperate. Something in her expression, the barely contained panic, the humiliation, reminded Elijah of his mother on the night they'd received the final hospital bill for Grandma May. The night she'd sat at their kitchen table, calculator in hand, quietly falling apart over numbers that would never add up. Before he fully realized what he was doing, Elijah pulled out his own worn wallet. "I've got it," he said, handing Mr. Wilson a $20 bill, money that had been earmarked for his mother's birthday gift. The woman stared at him. "No, I couldn't possibly." "It's okay," Elijah insisted. "Sounds like you need to be somewhere important." Her eyes searched his face. "Why would you do that? You don't even know me." Elijah thought of all the times strangers had shown small kindnesses to his family. The nurse who had snuck extra blankets into Grandma May's room, the teacher who had found a scholarship for his class trip, the neighbor who mysteriously left groceries during the month his mother was laid off. "Someone once told me kindness costs nothing," he said with a slight shrug. "But I think sometimes it costs exactly $16.87. For a moment, the woman seemed unable to speak. Then she gathered the purchased items. "What's your name?" "Elijah." "Elijah Franklin." "Thank you, Elijah Franklin." She took a business card from the counter and pressed it into his hand. "I won't forget this." After she left, Mr. Wilson raised an eyebrow at Elijah. "That was your money for your mama's gift, wasn't it?" Elijah nodded, already calculating which of his possessions he might sell to make up the difference. "Good man," Mr. Wilson said simply, then reached into the register. "Here's your change, and don't worry about those last 2 hours today. I'll clock you for the full shift." The rest of the evening passed uneventfully. Elijah finished his shift, picked up groceries, carefully calculated to stretch their budget, and began the walk home. The business card the woman had given him was still in his pocket, but he hadn't looked at it. Whatever crisis she had been facing, he hoped the small gesture had helped in some way. Night had fully settled over Oakwood Heights by the time Elijah reached their apartment building. The security light in the entryway was out again, forcing him to navigate the familiar stairs by memory and the dim glow of emergency exit signs. His mother was home, sitting at their small kitchen table with bills spread before her, an all-too-familiar sight. Alicia Franklin looked up as he entered, her face brightening despite the exhaustion evident in the shadows beneath her eyes. "There's my scholar," she said, quickly gathering the papers. At 41, Alicia carried herself with a dignity that transcended their circumstances. Her hospital scrubs had been exchanged for a faded t-shirt and sweatpants, her hair wrapped in a colourful scarf. "How was your shift?" Elijah asked, setting the groceries on the counter and beginning to unpack them. "Same as always." Mrs. Abernathy in 310 snuck her dog in again, and Supervisor Kelly pretended not to notice. She watched him organize the refrigerator with the precision she had taught him. "You got the good bread." "It was on sale," he lied. "Easily. And Mr. Wilson gave me an extra discount." His mother hummed non-committally. They both knew the patterns of their small deceptions. His to protect her from worry, hers to shield him from the full weight of their financial reality. "I made some stew," she said. "Just needs heating up." They ate together at the small table, exchanging the details of their day. Elijah mentioned his classes, a funny story about Mr. Patterson, the new shipment at the store. He didn't mention the woman or the money he had spent. His mother spoke of patients she had encountered, hospital gossip, a new scheduling system that might give her more consistent hours. After dinner, they settled into their evening routine. Alicia washed the dishes while Elijah worked on homework at Thetaball. Later, they watched a rerun of a cooking show they both enjoyed, critiquing the contestants' techniques with the exaggerated authority of people who had never set foot in a professional kitchen. It was nearly midnight when Elijah finally retired to his small bedroom. The space was meticulously organized, books arranged by subject, the single chair holding tomorrow's clothes, a corkboard covered with college brochures, scholarship information, and a carefully maintained calendar of deadlines and work schedules. He emptied his pockets onto the small desk. Keys, phone, the crumpled business card. For the first time, he examined it properly. Catherine Chamberlain, Executive Director, the Chamberlain Foundation. Building bridges to better futures. Below was an address in the financial district, a phone number, and an email. The card was heavy, stock, the lettering embossed in silver. Elijah pinned it to his corkboard without giving it much thought. Despite the woman's words, he expected nothing to come of their brief encounter. He changed into his sleep clothes and lay on his narrow bed, staring at the ceiling where, years ago, his grandmother had helped him paste glow-in-the-dark stars in the pattern of constellations. Most had fallen, but a few stubborn ones remained, faintly luminescent in the darkness. "Good night, Grandma May," he whispered. Another habit that had not faded with time. Tomorrow would be much like today. School, work, home, responsibilities that couldn't be ignored. The scholarships, say, still needed finishing. The electric bill was due on Friday, and Mr. Wilson had mentioned inventory coming up. Life in its relentless forward motion. What Elijah couldn't know, as sleep finally claimed him, was that tomorrow would be nothing like today. That the simple act of kindness in a corner store was about to upend everything he thought he understood about his place in the world. That morning would bring a transformation so profound it would feel like awakening into someone else's life entirely. In the quiet darkness of Oakwood Heights, as trains rumbled beneath the streets and sirens wailed in the distance, the universe was already rearranging itself around Elijah Franklin's unassuming generosity. By sunrise, everything would change. The alarm's insistent beeping dragged Elijah from a dream he couldn't quite remember. Something about his grandmother and stars falling like rain. He silenced the noise with a practiced motion, allowing himself the luxury of 5 more minutes beneath the warmth of his blankets. Outside, the city was already awake, car horns and distant conversations filtering through his window, along with the pale light of early morning. When he finally rose, the day felt oddly heavy, a peculiar sensation of anticipation that he attributed to the scholarship deadline looming at week's end. Elijah moved through his morning routine with mechanical efficiency, brushing teeth, washing face, changing into jeans and a faded blue hoodie that had once belonged to his father, a man who existed only in photographs and his mother's occasional, carefully edited stories. The apartment was empty, his mother having returned to the hospital for an early shift. Her note on the refrigerator reminded him about dinner and mentioned an extra shift she'd picked up for the weekend. More hours meant more money, but also less time together, the constant trade-off that shaped their lives. Elijah was pouring cereal when his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Good morning, Elijah Franklin. This is Catherine Chamberlain. We met at Wilson's Corner Store yesterday. I'd like to speak with you about an opportunity. Please call me at your earliest convenience." He stared at the message, milk carton suspended above his bowl. The woman from the store. The business card, now pinned to his corkboard. How had she gotten his number? Before he could formulate a response, his phone rang in his hand, the same unknown number flashing on the screen. "Hello?" he answered cautiously. "Elijah, thank you for answering." The woman's voice was clearer today, composed and authoritative. "I hope I'm not calling too early." "No, it's fine. I was just—" He looked down at his half-prepared breakfast. "Getting ready for school. I'll be brief then. I'd like to meet with you today, if possible. What you did yesterday, it was remarkably kind, especially given your own circumstances." Elijah frowned. "My circumstances? Forgive me," Catherine said quickly. "That was presumptuous. What I mean to say is, I'd like to thank you properly and discuss something that might interest you. Could you meet me at my office after your classes?" The Chamberlain Foundation's offices occupied the 38th floor of a gleaming tower in the financial district, a world away from Oakwood Heights, both geographically and metaphorically. Elijah had skipped his last period with Mr. Wilson's blessing. Some opportunities you don't say no to, son, and navigated the subway to arrive precisely at the appointed time. Now, sitting in a reception area more spacious than his entire apartment, surrounded by abstract art and the quiet efficiency of people in expensive suits, he felt profoundly out of place. His hoodie and worn sneakers marked him as an outsider, despite his efforts to sit straighter and affect the confidence he used for debate competitions. "Mr. Franklin?" An assistant appeared, her smile professional. "Ms. Chamberlain will see you now." Catherine Chamberlain's office offered a panoramic view of the city. Elijah could see all the way to the bridges connecting Manhattan to Brooklyn, and somewhere in that expanse was Oakwood Heights, though it was impossible to distinguish. From this height, Catherine rose from behind an imposing desk of glass and steel, her handshake firm. "Thank you for coming, Elijah. Please sit." He perched on the edge of a leather chair that probably cost more than 6 months of his mother's salary. "Your office is impressive." "It serves its purpose," she replied, studying him with an intensity that made him want to check if his face was clean. "Do you know what the Chamberlain Foundation does, Elijah?" He shook his head. "I looked it up online, but it just said philanthropy and community investment." "That's accurate, if somewhat vague." Catherine smiled slightly. "My late husband, Edward Chamberlain, built his fortune in technology and real estate. When he died 5 years ago, he left the majority of his wealth to establish this foundation with a specific mandate: to identify and support individuals with exceptional potential and character who might otherwise be overlooked by traditional systems." Elijah shifted uncomfortably. "I'm not sure what that has to do with me. Yesterday, when you paid for my purchases, you had no idea who I was. You saw someone in distress and acted with immediate compassion at personal cost to yourself." She leaned forward. "What you couldn't have known is that I was leaving a hospital where my 16-year-old son, James, has been in treatment for leukemia for the past 18 months. Elijah's discomfort immediately transformed into concern. "I'm sorry. Is he... He's responding well to the new treatment protocol," Catherine said, her professional demeanor slipping just slightly. "Yesterday was a particularly difficult day. His blood counts had dropped again, and I was not at my best when I stopped at that store." She stood, walking to the window. "After you helped me, I made some inquiries. I spoke with Gerald Wilson, who thinks very highly of you. I spoke with your school principal, who mentioned your academic achievements despite significant personal challenges. I learned about your grandmother's passing, your mother's dedication, your volunteer work at the community center." Elijah felt a strange mix of violation and pride, his life laid out like a case study. "You did all that research because it spent $17? Catherine turned back to him. "I did that research because in 20 years of philanthropy work, I've learned to recognize authentic goodness when I see it. What you did came from who you are, not what you hoped to gain." She returned to her desk and opened a folder. "The Chamberlain Foundation has a program called Quantum Leap. It identifies young people with exceptional promise and provides them with resources to achieve their potential without financial constraints." "Like a scholarship?" Elijah asked, thinking of his half-finished essay. "Much more comprehensive." Catherine slid a document across the desk. "This is a draft proposal for your consideration. The foundation would establish a trust in your name with an initial endowment of $2 million. The number hit Elijah like a physical blow. $2 million? The trust would provide for your complete educational expenses through graduate school, if you choose that path. It would purchase a property for you and your mother in a location of your choosing. It would establish an investment portfolio to generate ongoing income. In essence, Elijah, it would eliminate financial need as a factor in your life decisions moving forward." The room seemed to tilt slightly. Elijah gripped the arms of his chair. "This isn't real." "I assure you, it is very real." Catherine's expression softened. "I understand this is overwhelming. You don't need to make any decisions today. Take the proposal home, discuss it with your mother. Our legal team can explain any aspects that are unclear." Elijah stared at the document, its legal terminology swimming before his eyes. $2 million, property, investments. The words existed in a vocabulary that had never been meant for someone like him. It was too much, too sudden, too improbable. "Why? Me?" he finally managed. "There must be thousands of kids who could use this money. Kids with better grades or more talents or—" "This isn't a competition, Elijah," Catherine interrupted gently. "And it isn't charity in the way you might be thinking. The Chamberlain Foundation makes investments in human potential. We believe that by removing financial barriers for exceptional individuals like yourself, we create exponential positive impact." She paused, considering her next words carefully. "Yesterday, you saw me as a person in need, not as someone whose position could benefit you. That kind of authentic character is rare. Combined with your academic record and your resilience in the face of significant challenges, you're exactly the kind of person my husband believed could change the world, given the right resources." Elijah's phone buzzed in his pocket, probably his mother wondering where he was. The intrusion of normal life into this surreal conversation almost made him laugh. "This feels impossible," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "And yet, here we are." Catherine stood. "Take the proposal. My contact information is on the first page. I'm available day or night to answer any questions. We can proceed as quickly or as cautiously as you and your mother prefer." In a daze, Elijah rose, the document clutched in his hand like a lifeline. Catherine walked him to the door of her office. "One more thing, Elijah," she said, her tone shifting, subtly. "While I believe this opportunity could transform your life, it will also irrevocably change it. Wealth brings its own challenges. Some people will treat you differently. Others will want things from you. The foundation provides advisors to help navigate these waters, but ultimately it will be up to you to determine who you become." The elevator doors closed on Catherine's solemn expression, and Elijah began his descent, physically returning to ground level, mentally suspended in a state of disbelief. In his hand, the proposal seemed to pulse with potential energy, a paper bomb that could obliterate the life he knew and create something entirely new from its ashes. By the time he emerged onto the busy street, the afternoon sun casting long shadows between skyscrapers, Elijah's mind had settled on one imperative: get home, show his mother, confirm this wasn't an elaborate dream or cruel joke. He clutched the document inside his hoodie as he navigated the subway, protecting it like a fragile treasure. With each stop and start of the train, the reality of what had just occurred settled deeper. By tomorrow morning, his life as heck knew it. The careful budgeting, the long work hours, the constant calculations of what could be afforded and what must be deferred, might be fundamentally transformed. What he couldn't know yet was how that transformation would test everything he thought he understood about himself, his values, and the world he had navigated with such careful determination. The subway car rattled and swayed, but Elijah barely noticed. His fingers kept returning to the edge of the document tucked inside his hoodie, confirming its physical reality. $2 million. The number repeated in his mind like a mantra, simultaneously meaningless in its enormity and painfully specific in its potential. What would his mother say? Alicia Franklin had raised him on practical wisdom. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. But Catherine Chamberlain wasn't a lottery scammer or a street hustler promising quick riches. She was the director of a legitimate foundation, with offices 38 floors above the city streets. Oakwood Heights emerged from the subway station, like a different world after the gleaming towers of the financial district. The familiar storefronts, the cracked sidewalks, the rhythm of neighborhood life that had always been the backdrop to Elijah's existence. All of it suddenly seemed temporary, as if he were seeing it through the lens of impending departure. "Yo, E!" a voice broke through his thoughts. Darius was jogging toward him, basketball tucked under one arm. "Where were you last period? Rivera was looking for you about that scholarship thing." "I had a meeting," Elijah replied, the words feeling absurdly inadequate. "A meeting?" Darius raised an eyebrow. "Look at you, Mr. Important. About what?" Elijah hesitated. The truth would sound like madness or boasting. "Just a potential opportunity. Listen, I need to get home. My mom will be there soon." "Everything okay?" Darius's expression shifted to concern. They'd been friends since elementary school, long, enough to read the subtleties in each other's behavior. "Yeah, it's all good. I'll catch you tomorrow." As Elijah turned toward his apartment building, Darius called after him. "Group study at Tasha's on Thursday, right? For the history final." "Yeah," Elijah called back, wondering if by Thursday his entire reality would have shifted beyond recognition. The apartment was empty when he arrived, his mother's shift not yet finished. Elijah placed the proposal on the kitchen table and stared at it, half expecting it to disappear. Then, methodically, he began to research. Catherine Chamberlain's name yielded dozens of results. Charity galas, foundation annual reports, mentions in business publications. The Chamberlain Foundation itself had an extensive website detailing its various initiatives, though there was no public information about the Quantum Leap program she had described. Edward Chamberlain, her late husband, had indeed been a tech entrepreneur who had sold his cybersecurity company for billions before expanding into real estate development. His obituary mentioned his philanthropic vision and his wife and son James, the boy now fighting leukemia. Everything checked out, which meant the proposal sitting on their kitchen table was likely genuine. Elijah opened it, again, forcing himself to read the dense legal language more carefully. Terms like irrevocable trust, fiduciary responsibility, and disbursement schedule swam before his eyes. He would need his mother to help make sense of it all. The sound of keys in the door jolted him from his concentration. Alicia Franklin entered, still in her hospital scrubs, exhaustion evident in the slope of her shoulders. Elijah, you're home, early. She set down her bag, noticing the papers on the table. What's all this? He stood, suddenly unsure how to begin. Mum, something happened. Something big. Her expression immediately tensed. In their experience, unexpected news was rarely positive. What kind of big? Are you in trouble? No, nothing like that. Maybe you should sit down. With growing concern, Alicia took a seat at the table. You're scaring me, baby. Elijah took a deep breath. Yesterday, at the store, a woman came in. She'd forgotten her wallet and she was upset. Her son is sick and she needed to get back to him, so I paid for her stuff. That was kind of you, his mother said, still waiting for the part that required her to sit down. The woman, her name is Catherine Chamberlain. She runs a foundation. He pushed the proposal toward his mother. She called me today, asked me to come to her office, and she offered me this. Alicia skimmed the first page, her expression changing from confusion to disbelief. $2 million? What is this, some kind of joke? It's real, Mum. I checked her out online. The foundation is legitimate. She says they want to invest in my future, remove financial barriers so I can, I don't know, reach my full potential or something. His mother continued reading, her hands beginning to tremble slightly. This says they'd buy us a house, pay for college, set up investments. She looked up at him, eyes wide. Why would they do this for a boy they don't even know? Elijah repeated. Catherine's explanation about recognizing character and potential, about making investments in people who could create positive change. As he spoke, he watched his mother's face cycle through emotions, skepticism, hope, fear, and something that looked almost like grief. We need to talk to a lawyer, she finally said. Someone not connected to this foundation. This is too big for us to navigate alone. Catherine said they have advisors who can help. No, Alicia's tone was firm. We need our own advisor, someone looking out for our interests. She stood, moving to the small desk in the corner where they kept important documents. My union has a legal assistance program. I think it covers consultation for things like this. For the next hour, they made calls, first to the union's legal aid office, then to a financial advisor whose card Alicia had kept from a workshop at the hospital. Both promised to review the proposal and meet with them the following day. As the initial shock began to fade, practical questions emerged. How would this change their daily lives? Would they move from Oakwood Heights? What would they tell family and friends? And beneath these logistical concerns lay deeper uncertainties. Was this a blessing or a complication? Would it change who they were, what they valued? I should call. Catherine, let her know we're getting advice, Elijah said, reaching for his phone. To his surprise, his mother placed her hand over his. Not yet. Let's understand what we're looking at first. No need to rush. They ate dinner that night in a state of suspended reality, their usual conversations about work and school, overshadowed by the proposal that now sat in a folder by Alicia's purse. Occasionally, one of them would voice a possibility. We could find a place closer to the hospital, or you wouldn't have to work at Wilson's anymore, before falling silent again, the magnitude of potential change too vast to fully comprehend. After dinner, as Elijah washed dishes, a chore that suddenly seemed quaint, would rich people wash their own dishes? His mother approached with an expression he hadn't seen before. Elijah, she said quietly, I need you to promise me something. He turned off the water. What is it? If this is real, if tomorrow these lawyers tell us this is legitimate and we decide to accept it, promise me you won't let it change who you are. Mom, I'm serious. Her eyes were fierce with protective love. Money changes people. I've seen it. It can make you forget where you came from, who was there for you when you had nothing. It can make you think you're better than others, or make you suspicious of everyone's motives. Elijah dried his hands, meeting his mother's gaze. I won't change. How could I? It happens slowly, she said. Not all at once. But your grandmother raised you right, and I've done my best to continue that work. So promise me, no matter what happens with this foundation and their millions, you'll stay Elijah Franklin from Oakwood Heights, who helps people in need, even when it costs him something. I promise, he said, the words feeling both simple and impossibly complex. That night, sleep eluded him. Elijah stared at the ceiling, mind racing with visions of what life could become. College without debt, a home without leaking faucets or unreliable heat, his mother not having to clean hospital rooms through the night. But alongside these appealing images came unsettling questions. Would his friends treat him differently? Would teachers who had believed in him take credit for his success, as if wealth were the only meaningful measure? Would the neighborhood that had shaped him, its struggles and strengths alike, become merely a story he told, a background he had overcome? Around 3 in the morning, he reached for his phone and typed a message to Catherine. Still processing. Everything. Meeting with advisors tomorrow. Thank you for the opportunity. Her response came immediately, as if she too were awake with the weight of possibility. Take all the time you need. This decision should not be made lightly. I believe in you, Elijah. The next day unfolded in a blur of meetings and revelations. Mr. Singh, the financial advisor, confirmed that the proposal appeared legitimate and extraordinarily generous. Ms. Okafor, the union lawyer, reviewed the legal language and explained the implications. Yes, this would transform their financial situation completely. No, there didn't appear to be hidden obligations or concerning clauses. The foundation retains some oversight of the educational trust until you're 25, Ms. Okafor explained, but that's fairly standard. They want to ensure the money is used for its intended purpose. After that, the assets transfer fully to your control. By late afternoon, they had a list of clarifying questions for Catherine, which Elijah sent via email. Her responses came within the hour, each answer transparent and reassuring. Yes, they could choose where to live. Yes, Alicia could continue working if she wished. No, there were no expectations of public acknowledgement or foundation promotion. We should meet with her. Together, Alicia decided after reading the responses. I want to look this woman in the eye. Catherine agreed to meet them the following evening at a neutral location, a quiet cafe halfway between Oakwood Heights and the financial district. As they waited for her, Elijah noticed his mother's hands fidgeting with her purse strap, a rare display of nervousness. It's going to be okay, Mom, he said, covering her hand with his own. Whatever we decide. I know, baby. She smiled, though tension remained in her eyes. I just keep thinking about your grandmother. What she would say about all this. Before Elijah could respond, Catherine appeared, dressed more casually than she had been in her office but still radiating an aura of professional confidence. She extended her hand to Alicia. Mrs. Franklin, thank you for meeting with me. I understand you must have many questions. Alicia's handshake was firm. I appreciate you agreeing to this meeting, Ms. Chamberlain. And it's Ms. Franklin, actually. Of course, forgive me. Catherine took a seat across from them. I want to be completely transparent about what the Chamberlain Foundation is offering and why. Elijah's act of kindness came at a particularly vulnerable moment for me, but our interest in him extends far beyond that single interaction. For the next hour, Catherine elaborated on the Foundation's mission and her late husband's vision. She explained how the Quantum Leap program had supported 12 other young people over the past decade, some now doctors, engineers, community organizers. Each recipient has used their opportunity differently, she said, but all have created ripple effects of positive impact. We don't dictate paths. We remove obstacles. Alicia listened intently, occasionally asking pointed questions about expectations, reporting requirements, and whether accepting this offer would affect Elijah's eligibility for other programs or scholarships. The only requirement, Catherine emphasized, is a commitment to education and to personal growth. How that manifests is entirely up to Elijah. As the conversation progressed, Elijah observed his mother's posture gradually relaxing. Catherine's sincerity seemed to be breaking through her protective skepticism. And how is your son? Alicia asked, suddenly, the question catching both Catherine and Elijah by surprise. Catherine's composed facade wavered slightly. James had a good day today. His counts are improving. The doctors are cautiously optimistic. I'll keep him in my prayers, Alicia said simply. The moment created a bridge between the two women, both mothers navigating difficult circumstances, albeit vastly different ones. By the end of the meeting, Alicia's questions had been answered to her satisfaction. We need to discuss this privately, she told Catherine. But I appreciate your transparency. Of course. Catherine stood to leave. Whatever you decide, please know that meeting Elijah, seeing such innate goodness in action, has already made a difference in my life. That remains true regardless of whether you accept our offer. After Catherine departed, mother and son sat in silence for a long moment. What do you think? Elijah finally asked. Alicia took a deep breath. I think she's genuine, and I think this opportunity is real. She reached across the table to take his hand. But the decision has to be yours, Elijah. You're the one whose life will change the most. Our lives, he corrected. We're in this together. Always, she agreed with a small smile. But you're 17 now. almost a man, old enough to have a say in your own future. That night, they sat at their kitchen table and made a list, pros and cons, hopes and fears, what they stood to gain and what they might risk losing. The gain column grew lengthy. Financial security, educational opportunities, a better home, freedom from constant worry about basic needs. The risk column was shorter but weighed heavily. Potential alienation from their community, pressure to conform to expectations, unforeseen obligations, the unpredictable ways wealth might change their perspectives. I think we should accept, Elijah said finally, but with conditions. What conditions? His mother asked. We don't move far from Oakwood Heights. Maybe to a better building, but still in the neighborhood. I keep working at Wilson's until graduation. Reduced hours maybe, but I don't just quit. And we don't tell people about the money right away. We ease into changes. Alicia studied him thoughtfully. That sounds wise. Grounded. And one more thing, he added. We find a way to give back to Oakwood Heights, something that helps people here. His mother's smile was proud. Your grandmother would approve of that. The decision made, they called Catherine the next morning. She expressed delight at their acceptance and respect for their conditions. The Foundation's legal team will prepare the final documents. We can sign them next week if that works for your schedule. That's very fast, Alicia commented. When we find the right person for Quantum Leap, we prefer not to delay, Catherine explained, but we can extend the timeline if you need more time. No, Elijah said firmly. Next week is fine. That afternoon, at Wilson's corner store, Elijah worked his shift with a strange sense of déjà vu. Just days ago, he had stood at this same register, counting out his limited dollars to help a stranger. Now that simple act had catalyzed a transformation. He still couldn't fully comprehend. You seem distracted today, Mr. Wilson observed as they restocked the cooler. Everything all right at home? Yes, sir, Elijah replied automatically, then hesitated. Mr. Wilson had been a constant presence in his life, a mentor in many ways. Actually, something's happened. Something good, I think, but big. Mr. Wilson straightened, giving Elijah his full attention. I'm listening. Elijah explained the situation in broad strokes, watching the older man's expression shift from surprise to cautious optimism. That woman from the other day, Mr. Wilson said when Elijah finished. I thought there was something different about her. Carried herself like someone used to being listened to. We're going to sign the papers next week, Elijah said. I wanted you to know I'll still be working here, just maybe fewer hours. Mr. Wilson placed a hand on his shoulder. Son, if I had $1 million, the last place I'd be is behind this counter. It's not about the money, Elijah replied with sudden conviction. This place, what we do here, it matters to people, to the neighborhood. The older man studied him with new appreciation. Well, your job is here as long as you want it, but don't let misplaced loyalty keep you from flying when you've been given wings. As he walked home that evening, Elijah's phone buzzed with messages from Zoe, Darius, and Tasha, confirming their study session the following day. Normal life continuing alongside this extraordinary development. He hadn't told them yet. Wasn't sure how to begin that conversation or how it would change things between them. For now, he existed in a liminal space, no longer the Elijah who had to count every dollar, not yet the Elijah whose life had been transformed by wealth. In this in-between moment, he could still look at Oakwood Heights and see it as home rather than a place he had escaped. He could still enter his apartment building and greet Mr. Patterson without the gulf of changed circumstances stretching between them. By this time next week, everything would be different. The documents would be signed, the trust established, the trajectory of his life fundamentally altered. Whether that alteration would lead to fulfillment of his potential, as Catherine believed, or to unforeseen complications remained to be seen. For tonight, he was still just Elijah, son of Alicia, grandson of May, student, employee, friend. Tomorrow would bring its own revelations. 1 week after signing the trust documents in the Chamberlain Foundation's gleaming conference room, Elijah stood in the center of a sun-filled apartment that now belonged to him and his mother. Located in Riverdale Heights, an area just 15 minutes from Oakwood but worlds apart in terms of amenities, the 3-bedroom unit occupied the 5th floor of a well-maintained building with a doorman and rooftop garden. The walls were freshly painted, the appliances new, the windows offering views of the river and city skyline beyond. It doesn't feel real, Alicia murmured, running her fingers along the granite countertop in the kitchen. I keep expecting someone to tell us there's been a mistake. Elijah understood the sentiment perfectly. In the 7 days since they had signed the paperwork, their lives had accelerated with dizzying speed. The trust had been established with the promised $2 million. A financial advisor named Marcus Taylor had been appointed to help manage the investments. A real estate agent had shown them properties. And this apartment, spacious, secure, still connected to their community, but free from its challenges, had immediately felt right to both of them. The purchase had been completed with breathtaking efficiency, Catherine Chamberlain's influence smoothing administrative hurdles that might have delayed the process for months. Yesterday, a moving company had packed and transported their modest possessions from the old apartment. Today, they stood amid a strange blend of familiar and new, their worn furniture looking simultaneously out of place and defiantly authentic in the upscale space. "We can get new furniture," Elijah suggested, noticing his mother's gaze on their second-hand sofa. "Maybe some things," she conceded, "but not everything. Some pieces have history." She touched the small side table that had belonged to Grandma May, its surface scratched but lovingly polished. "Some things aren't meant to be replaced just because we can afford to." The doorbell rang, startling them both. They weren't yet accustomed to having a doorbell rather than a knock on a thin apartment door. Elijah opened it to find a delivery person holding an enormous arrangement of flowers. "Delivery for Franklin," the young woman said cheerfully. "That's us," Elijah confirmed, accepting the arrangement and signing the electronic pad. The card nestled among the blooms read, "Wishing you joy in your new home. This is just the beginning. Catherine Chamberlain." Alicia found a vase for the flowers, placing them on the dining table they had brought from their old apartment. The contrast was striking, the vibrant professional arrangement atop the scratched wood surface where they had eaten thousands of meals, done homework, paid bills, and now signed documents that had changed everything. "I should head to the hospital," Alicia said, checking her watch. Though the trust provided enough income that she could have quit immediately, she had decided to give proper notice and work through the next 2 weeks. "People are already talking," Janice from Pediatrics asked. "How we could afford this place." "What did you tell her?" Elijah asked, suddenly tense. They had agreed to be vague about their change in circumstances until they adjusted to it themselves. "That we had received an unexpected inheritance from a distant relative," Alicia replied, the cover story they had prepared. She seemed to accept it, but there were definitely questions in her eyes. After his mother left for her shift, Elijah wandered through the apartment, still marveling at the space that was now theirs. His new bedroom was twice the size of his old one, with a desk by the window and a private bathroom. Luxuries that would have seemed impossible just days ago. His phone, which had been uncharacteristically silent, suddenly chimed with a message from Darius. "Yo, where you been? Heard rumors you moved. What's going on?" Elijah stared at the screen, unsure how to respond. He hadn't been to school for 3 days, excused absences to handle the move, and meet with various advisors assigned by the foundation. The absence, combined with his mother giving notice at the hospital and their move from the apartment building, where multiple families from Lincoln Carter High lived, had inevitably sparked gossip. Before he could formulate a response, more messages arrived. From Zoe, from Tasha, from classmates he barely spoke to. All variations on the same question. "What's going on with Elijah Franklin?" The most direct came from Tasha. "People saying your family came into money. True? And if so, why haven't you told your friends?" Guilt surged through him. These were his closest friends, people who had shared their own struggles and triumphs with him. He had kept them at arm's length during the most significant development of his life, partly from disbelief, partly from uncertainty about how it would change their relationships. After several false starts, he sent a group text to Darius, Zoe, and Tasha. "Sorry I've been MIA. Something big happened. Can you meet at Morningside Park in an hour? I'll explain everything." Their responses came quickly. Confusion, concern, but also immediate agreement to meet. Elijah changed clothes, suddenly conscious of his appearance, in a way he hadn't been before. His wardrobe remained largely unchanged, but now each worn hem and faded logo seemed like a choice rather than a necessity. Would his friends see him differently? Once they knew, would they resent him? Expect things from him? These questions circled in his mind as he made his way to the park, a neutral location where they had often studied during warmer months. He spotted them immediately. Zoe sketching on her ever-present pad, Darius dribbling his basketball against the pavement, Tasha reading with the intense concentration that characterized everything she did. "Hey!" he called as he approached. They looked up simultaneously, their expressions a mix of relief and wariness. "There he is," Darius said, tucking the basketball under his arm. The disappearing man. What's going on, E? Tasha asked, closing her book. The rumor mill is wild. Someone said your family won the lottery. Someone else said you got recruited by the FBI. She rolled her eyes at the absurdity while studying him carefully. Elijah sat on the bench beside Zoe, gathering his thoughts. It's kind of a long story. We've got time, Zoe said quietly. That's what friends are for, right? Taking a deep breath, Elijah began with the encounter at Wilson's corner store. The woman who'd forgotten her wallet, his impulsive decision to pay for her purchases. As the story unfolded, his friend's expressions shifted from curiosity to disbelief. Wait, Darius interrupted when Elijah reached the part about Catherine's offer. You're saying some rich lady gave you $2 million because you bought her cold medicine. It's more complicated than that, Elijah explained, detailing the Chamberlain Foundation's mission and Catherine's explanation about investing in human potential. It's not just a gift, it's a trust for education and future opportunities. But, still, Zoe said, that's incredible. So you're rich now? Tasha asked bluntly. Elijah shifted uncomfortably. I guess, technically. But it doesn't feel real yet. Is that why you moved? Darius asked. People in the building were saying your mum gave notice on your apartment. We got a place in Riverdale Heights, Elijah admitted. It's nice, but it's not like we moved to a mansion or anything. A silence fell over the group, heavy with unasked questions and shifting dynamics. Elijah braced himself for resentment or accusations of abandonment, reactions he had feared since the moment Catherine had made her offer. Instead, Zoe spoke softly. I'm happy for you, E. If anyone deserves a break, it's you. For real, Darius agreed. After everything with your grandma and how hard you've been working, this is like cosmic justice or something. Tasha remained quiet, her expression thoughtful. When she finally spoke, her words carried the straightforward honesty that had always defined their friendship. It's going to change things, not just for you, but between us. We might as well be honest about that. Elijah met her gaze. I don't want it to. What we want doesn't always matter, she replied. Not unkindly, but we can be intentional about how we handle it. The conversation gradually eased into more practical questions. Would he continue at Lincoln Carter? Yes. He was determined to graduate with his class. Would he still work at Wilson's? Part-time, through the school year. Was he going to buy a car? No, not yet. He didn't even have his license. As they talked, Elijah felt the knot in his chest slowly loosening. His friend's reactions were complex but fundamentally supportive. They were adjusting to his new reality alongside him, processing what it meant for their shared future. You know what this means though, right? Darius said as they were preparing to leave. You're definitely paying next time we get pizza. The joke broke the remaining tension, and Elijah laughed with genuine relief. Deal. Walking home to his new home, Elijah felt both lighter and somehow more firmly grounded. Sharing the truth with his friends had made the situation more real, while simultaneously making it less isolating. Whatever changes lay ahead, he wouldn't face them entirely alone. The following Monday, Elijah returned to school, bracing himself for the inevitable attention. News of his changed circumstances had spread throughout the student body and faculty, distorted through the lens of rumor into various fantastical narratives. He had won the lottery, discovered a long-lost billionaire, relative, been secretly adopted by celebrities. Miss Rivera pulled him aside after English class. I heard about your good fortune, she said carefully. Quite a development. Yes, ma'am, Elijah replied, uncertain how to navigate this conversation with a teacher he respected. I assume this changes your college plans, she asked. The question caught him off guard. I haven't thought that far ahead yet. Everything's happened so fast. Ms. Rivera studied him thoughtfully. You've always been focused on practical options, state schools, scholarships. Now the world's opened up. Any college would be within reach financially. The realization hit Elijah with unexpected force. He had spent years tailoring his ambitions to what seemed possible. Schools with generous financial aid, programs that offered clear paths to stable careers. Now those constraints had vanished, replaced by an overwhelming array of possibilities. I still want to apply for that futures scholarship, he said firmly. This doesn't change the fact that I've earned it. Ms. Rivera smiled slightly. No, it doesn't. But it does change the impact that money would have for you versus another student who might need it desperately. The implication stung, though Elijah recognized the truth in it. So I should withdraw my application? That's not for me to say, she replied. But part of privilege is considering how your choices affect others with fewer options. That's something you'll be navigating a lot in the coming years. The conversation left him unsettled as he made his way to the cafeteria. Inside, the usual lunchtime chaos reigned, but he noticed heads turning as he entered. Conversations pausing momentarily. The sensation of being watched, assessed, categorized anew raised goosebumps on his arms. Zoe waved from their usual table, where she sat with Darius and Tasha. As Elijah crossed the room to join them, her past a table of students he knew casually, from debate team. "Hey Elijah," called Jeremy Chen, a senior he had worked with on the last tournament. "Heard you're living large now. Any chance you want to invest in my startup idea?" The question was delivered with a smile, but something in Jeremy's tone suggested it wasn't entirely a joke. Before Elijah could respond, another voice joined in. "Forget his startup. My band needs a producer. You could be like our patron or whatever." More comments followed, each ostensibly humorous, but carrying an undercurrent of expectation. By the time Elijah reached his friends, his appetite had diminished considerably. "Vultures circling already," Tasha observed dryly as he sat down. "They're just joking around," Elijah said, though he wasn't entirely convinced. "Half joking," Darius corrected. "People hear money and start seeing opportunities instead of a person." The assessment was uncomfortably accurate. Throughout the day, Elijah found himself approached by classmates who'd rarely spoken to him before, some with transparent attempts at newfound friendship, others with more subtle strategies for connection. Even some teachers seemed to regard him differently, their manners slightly more deferential, as if his financial circumstances had somehow elevated his academic contributions. By the time the final bell rang, Elijah felt drained in a way that had nothing to do with physical exertion. He headed to Wilson's corner store, the familiar environment now a welcome refuge from the strange new social terrain he was navigating. Mr. Wilson greeted him with a nod, making no reference to the changes in Elijah's life beyond asking, "How's the new place?" "Different," Elijah replied honestly. "Still getting used to it." "You will," the older man said simply, then gestured to a delivery that had just arrived. "Mind helping with that shipment before you start your register shift?" The mundane task of unpacking boxes and pricing items provided a comforting normalcy. Here, at least, his value remained constant, defined by his work ethic and reliability, rather than the trust fund now bearing his name. As he arranged products on the shelves, a customer entered. Mr. Patterson, from his old building. The elderly man did a double take when he spotted Elijah. "Young blood, didn't expect to see you here." He approached with his characteristic slow gait. "Heard you and your mama moved to fancier digs." "Just a better building," Elijah said, suddenly self-conscious. Still in the area, Mr. Patterson studied him with eyes that had witnessed decades of neighborhood changes. "Way of the world, I suppose. Folks move up when they can. No shame in that." "We didn't want to go far," Elijah explained. "This is still home, is it?" The question was gentle but pointed. Neighborhoods changing, more and more folks with money moving in, pushing the rest of us out. Circle of life in the city. The observation touched on a discomfort Elijah had been carrying since the move. The sense that their newfound prosperity positioned them as part of a process that often harmed communities like Oakwood Heights, that in accepting the apartment in Riverdale, they had crossed an invisible line from being affected by gentrification to potentially contributing to it. "I don't want to be part of that problem," Elijah said quietly. Mr. Patterson's expression softened. "You're a good young man, Elijah. Your grandmother raised you right. Just remember where you came from and find ways to lift others as you climb." The conversation stayed with Elijah throughout his shift and followed him home to the new apartment, where he found his mother sitting at the dining table with Marcus Taylor, their financial advisor. "Perfect timing," Alicia said as he entered. "We're discussing investment strategies for the trust." Marcus, a black man in his early 40s with a precise manner of speaking and immaculate suit, greeted Elijah warmly. "Your mother has excellent instincts for responsible growth. You're fortunate to have her guidance." For the next hour, they reviewed portfolio allocations, risk assessments, and projected returns, a vocabulary that felt foreign to Elijah despite his natural aptitude for mathematics. Marcus explained concepts patiently, emphasizing the long-term perspective the trust was designed to support. At the current allocation, the principal should grow significantly over time while still providing substantial annual income, he concluded. Of course, you might consider allocating a portion toward charitable interests as well. Charitable interests, Elijah repeated, his conversation with Mr. Patterson suddenly at the forefront of his mind. Many of our clients find that philanthropy becomes an important part of their financial strategy, Marcus explained. It's both personally rewarding and offers certain tax advantages. After the advisor departed, Elijah sat with his mother at the table that had traveled with them from their old life to this new one. "You've been quiet," Alicia observed. "Rough day at school." "Just adjusting," he replied. "Everyone's treating me differently, like I've changed, even though I haven't." His mother's expression was sympathetic but tinged with resignation. Money changes how the world sees you, even if it doesn't change who you are inside. "Mr. Patterson made a comment about gentrification," Elijah continued. "About people with money moving into the neighborhood, pushing others out. It made me think about our position now." Alicia was quiet for a moment, considering. "That's a fair concern. We've been given an opportunity that most people in Oakwood Heights will never have. The question becomes, what responsibility comes with that opportunity?" The question lingered between them, neither rhetorical nor easily answered. As the evening progressed into night, Elijah found himself standing at the window of his new bedroom, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there was Catherine Chamberlain, whose impulsive act of generosity had set this transformation in motion. Somewhere was the old apartment, now occupied by another family. Somewhere were all the lives continuing as before, while his had veered onto an entirely different path. 2 weeks into his new reality, the initial shock had given way to a more complex awareness, not just of what he had gained, but of what that gain meant in the larger context of his community, his relationships, and his own identity. The money itself was the least complicated part of the equation. Far more challenging were the questions it raised about privilege, responsibility, and authentic connection in a world where financial status so often determined how people were valued. As Elijah finally turned away from the window, his gaze fell on his grandmother's locket, now resting on his new desk. He picked it up, feeling its familiar weight in his palm. A physical connection to the person who had taught him that Apperson's worth had nothing to do with their bank account. "I'm trying to figure this out, Grandma," he whispered to the empty room. "I'm trying to do right by what you taught me." Outside, the city continued its nighttime rhythms, indifferent to the moral calculations of one young man suddenly thrust into privilege. But within the quiet of his room, those calculations felt like the most important work Elijah had ever undertaken, more significant, perhaps, than any financial investment the trust might make. 3 months into Elijah's new life, rhythms had begun to establish themselves. The apartment in Riverdale Heights no longer felt foreign. Pictures hung on walls, furniture had been selectively updated, and the kitchen now bore the marks of Alicia's cooking experiments, a luxury she'd rarely had time for in their previous life. Elijah had maintained his promise to keep working at Wilson's Corner Store, though his hours were reduced to accommodate his increasing involvement with the Chamberlain Foundation. Catherine had invited him to observe board meetings, introduced him to other Quantum Leap recipients, and encouraged him to think expansively about his future. College applications were in progress, with schools that had once seemed like impossible, dreams now well within reach. His friendship with Darius, Zoe, and Tasha had survived the initial awkwardness, though subtle shifts had occurred. They now usually gathered at Elijah's apartment rather than at the community center or park, the comfortable space and well-stocked refrigerator creating a gravitational pull that none of them acknowledged directly. Elijah made conscious efforts to maintain balance, paying for group meals without ostentation, offering help with college application fees without undermining his friend's dignity. On this particular Friday afternoon, Elijah was at the foundation headquarters, waiting outside Catherine's office for their weekly mentoring session. These meetings had become a cornerstone of his new routine, opportunities to discuss everything from investment strategies to ethical dilemmas with someone who had navigated the complexities of wealth and influence for decades. Catherine's assistant, Grace, offered him a smile. "She's just wrapping up a call. Should be out in a few minutes." Elijah nodded, pulling out his phone to check emails. Among them was a message from Marcus Taylor regarding a separate account Catherine had suggested, establishing a discretionary fund for community initiatives in Oakwood Heights. The idea had immediately resonated with Elijah, addressing his concerns about giving back to the neighborhood that had shaped him. As he scrolled through the proposal details, his attention was drawn to voices rising from Catherine's office. Not quite an argument, but a tense exchange that pierced the usual professional calm of the foundation spaces. "The board won't approve it, Catherine. Not with these numbers." A male voice, unfamiliar to Elijah. "The board follows my recommendations, Richard. They always have." Catherine's voice was controlled but firm. Because your recommendations have been sound. This is sentimental indulgence. You're compromising the foundation's future. I'm advancing its mission. There's a difference. A heavy sigh then. This is about that boy, isn't it? The one from the store. Elijah froze, suddenly uncomfortable with his position as unintentional eavesdropper, but unable to unhear what had already been said. Elijah Franklin represents exactly the kind of investment Edward believed in, Catherine replied, her tone cooling further. $2 million for one beneficiary is unprecedented, and you know it. The standard grant is half that amount. You've broken protocol, diverted resources, all because… What? He bought you cold medicine. That's reductive, and you know it, Richard. Is it? Or is it that he reminds you of James, another black teenager fighting against the odds? Are you trying to save this one because you couldn't… That's enough, Catherine's voice cut like steel. My personal motivations are irrelevant. The investment has been made. The trust is established. And what happens when the board reviews the annual portfolio next month? When they see the discrepancies? When they question your judgment? They won't. A bitter laugh. Because you'll doctor the reports? Catherine, listen to yourself. Because I've transferred personal funds to cover the difference. A beat of silence. My money, Richard. Not the foundation's. Everything is above board, but not transparent. Not what Edward would have wanted. The door to Catherine's office swung open suddenly, revealing a man in his 50s. Silver-haired, impeccably dressed, his expression a mask of controlled frustration. He stopped short at the sight of Elijah, recognition flashing across his features. Mr. Franklin, he said, his tone shifting to professional courtesy. Richard Chamberlain, Catherine's brother-in-law. Elijah stood, uncertain how to respond given what he'd just overheard. Sir. Richard's gaze was appraising, revealing nothing of his thoughts before he nodded curtly and continued toward the elevators. Catherine appeared in the doorway, composed, as ever, though a slight tension around her eyes betrayed her awareness of the awkward encounter. Elijah, please come in. I apologize for the delay. The office felt charged with the lingering energy of the confrontation. Elijah took his usual seat across from Catherine's desk, unsure whether to acknowledge what he had overheard or pretend ignorance. Catherine made the decision for him. I assume you heard some of that exchange. Yes, he admitted. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but… Of course not. She sighed, removing her glasses and pinching the bridge of her nose briefly. A rare display of vulnerability. Richard and I have different perspectives on foundation management. It's a family business, with all the complications that entails. Elijah hesitated, then asked the question burning in his mind. Is it true? About the $2 million being more than usual? About using your personal money? Catherine studied him, seeming to weigh her response. Yes, it's true. The standard Quantum Leap grant is $1 million. I chose to double it in your case. Why? The question came out quieter than he intended. Because I believe in you, Elijah. Her response was immediate, but something in her expression suggested layers beneath the simple answer. Is it because of your son? He pressed, remembering Richard's accusation. Because I remind you of him. Catherine's composure wavered momentarily. Richard shouldn't have said that. It was cruel and simplistic. She rose, moving to the window that overlooked the city. James is 17, like you. He's brilliant, compassionate, determined. And yes, I see some similarities between you. But that's not why I made this investment. She turned back to face him. When I met you, Elijah, I was at my lowest point. James's prognosis had just worsened significantly. I was facing the very real possibility of losing my child. In that moment, you showed me kindness, without calculation. It reminded me of why Edward established this foundation in the first place, to recognize and nurture the best of humanity. But you used your own money, Elijah said, struggling to process the implications. You broke rules for me. I bent parameters, she corrected. The mission remained intact. Elijah felt suddenly unmoored. The past 3 months, the apartment, the opportunities, the plans for the future, all rested on a foundation that seemed less solid than he had believed. What happens now? If the board finds out? Will they take back the money? No, Catherine said firmly. The trust is legally established. The funds have been transferred. The additional $1 million came from my personal accounts. There are no legal issues, only governance questions. But your position is secure for now. She returned to her desk. Edward left controlling interest in the foundation to me. The board can advise but not override my decisions. Richard is concerned about precedent, about my emotional judgment. He's not entirely wrong to raise those concerns. Elijah absorbed this information, his mind racing. Everything he had come to accept as his new reality suddenly seemed contingent, conditional, dependent on one woman's potentially questionable decision. I need to know the truth, he said finally. All of it, not just what you think I should. Here. Catherine regarded him with a mix of respect and resignation. James was diagnosed with leukemia 2 years ago. Initially, his prognosis was good. Then came complications, relapses. The day I met you, we had just learned that his cancer was aggressive again, resistant to previous treatments. She paused, gathering herself. I was not rational that day. When you helped me, this stranger who had nothing to gain, it felt like a sign. I became fixated on the idea that your act of kindness deserved reciprocation on a cosmic scale. That, perhaps, if I channeled enough good into the world through you, some balance would be restored and James would improve. The admission hung in the air between them. Elijah felt a creeping sense of disillusionment. So, this was never really about my potential. It was about your son. No, Catherine leaned forward intently. That's what Richard doesn't understand. What he reduces to sentimentality. Yes, the timing and my emotional state played a role in my initial interest. But everything since, the investment, the mentorship, my belief in your future, that's based on who you are, Elijah. Your intelligence, your character, your vision. How can I know that for sure? He asked, the question as much for himself as for her. You can't, she acknowledged. Not completely. Trust requires uncertainty. But consider this. If I wanted only to create good karma for James, I could have made an anonymous donation to a children's hospital. I chose instead to invest specifically in you, to commit not just money, but time and guidance. Elijah fell silent, processing. The narrative he had constructed around his changed circumstances, that he had been recognized purely for his inherent worthiness, was more complicated than he had allowed himself to believe. There were elements of chance, of timing, of a mother's desperate hope for her child's recovery wrapped into the opportunity he had received. How is James now? He asked, after a long moment. Something softened in Catherine's expression. Stable. The new treatment protocol is showing promise. He's back in school part-time. I'd like to meet him, Elijah said, surprising himself with the impulse. If that's okay. Catherine appeared equally surprised. You would? Yes. He's part of this story too. Our stories are connected now, whether we planned it that way or not. She nodded slowly. I think he would like that. He's been curious about you since I told him how we met. The meeting continued, their usual agenda set aside in favor of this more fundamental conversation. By the time Elijah left the foundation building, the afternoon sun was casting long shadows between skyscrapers. He walked without a clear destination, needing physical movement to accompany the mental processing of everything he had learned. The trust was real. The opportunities were real. But the origin story was more complex, more human, more flawed than the clean narrative of meritocratic recognition he had allowed himself to believe. Catherine's decision had been influenced by emotional factors, by her son's illness, by the cosmic bargaining of a desperate parent. Did that diminish the opportunity? Did it change what he could or should do with it? As Elijah navigated the crowded sidewalks, these questions tumbled through his mind without clear resolution. What felt certain, however, was that his path forward had just become more complicated, not just in terms of what he would do with his newfound resources, but in how he would understand his place in a world where good fortune was rarely as straightforward as it appeared. The meeting with James Chamberlain occurred on a Sunday afternoon, at the Chamberlain family's Upper East Side brownstone. Elijah arrived precisely on time, a small gift bag in hand containing a hand-selected book on astronomy. Catherine had mentioned her son's fascination with space during one of their conversations. The house was elegant without being ostentatious, its refined aesthetic speaking of generational wealth that had none to announce itself. Catherine greeted him at the door, her usual professional demeanor softened in this personal context. Thank you for coming, she said, ushering him into a sunlit living room where shelves of books climbed to the high ceilings. James is looking forward to meeting you. A slender teenager appeared in the doorway, tall like his mother, but with a frame made more fragile by illness. His complexion held the pallor of someone who had spent too much time indoors, and a knit beanie covered. What Elijah hassomed was hair loss from treatments, but his eyes were sharp and curious, immediately assessing Elijah with undisguised interest. So you're the guy who bought cold medicine and got $2 million. James said by way of greeting, a hint of wry humor in his voice. I should try that sometime. James, Catherine admonished gently. It's okay, Elijah said, finding himself smiling at the directness. When you put it that way, it does sound pretty ridiculous. A ghost of a smile crossed James's face. Mum says you're some kind of rare moral exemplar in a cynical world. I figured you'd be wearing a cape or something. The ice effectively broken, the three settled into conversation. James proved to be both perceptive and surprisingly forthright. About his illness, his mother's protective instincts, and the strange intersection of their lives. She came home different that day, James told Elijah as they sat in a garden behind the house, Catherine having excused herself to prepare tea. I could tell something had shifted. She had this look. I don't know how to describe it. Hope? Elijah suggested. James considered this. Maybe. Or purpose. Like she'd found something she could control when so much was out of control. He adjusted his beanie, a self-conscious gesture. Cancer makes everyone around you feel helpless. They need projects, missions. The observation struck Elijah with its maturity and insight. And I became her project. At first, maybe, James acknowledged. But not anymore, I don't think. Now she genuinely believes in whatever she sees in you. He studied Elijah with renewed curiosity. What are you going to do with it? The money? The opportunity? It was the question Elijah had been asking himself with increasing urgency since the revelation about Catherine's motivations. I'm still figuring that out. Well, speaking as the guy whose mum's midlife crisis made you a millionaire, James said, with a sardonic smile that belied the seriousness behind his words. I hope you do something that matters. Otherwise, what's the point of all this? When Elijah left the Chamberlain house several hours later, these words echoed in his mind. What was the point of all this? What purpose could justify the extraordinary circumstances that had brought him into this new life? Over the following weeks, these questions became the center of Elijah's thoughts as the various strands of his life continued to evolve. College acceptances arrived. Harvard, Stanford, Yale, schools that had once seemed as distant as Mars now eagerly offering him positions in their incoming classes. His mother resigned from the hospital, deciding to pursue the nursing degree she had deferred when she became pregnant with Elijah. The Community Fund for Oakwood Heights was established, its first grants supporting the after-school program where Elijah had once received homework help. On the surface, everything was proceeding ideally, but beneath this apparent success, Elijah felt increasingly unsettled. The revelation about Catherine's initial motivations had opened a fissure in his understanding of his place in this new world. If chance and emotion rather than pure merit had played such significant roles in his selection, did he truly deserve what he had received? And if he accepted that element of randomness, what responsibility did that place on him? These questions crystallized one evening at the dinner table in their Riverdale Heights apartment. Elijah and his mother were discussing his college options when he suddenly set down his fork. I'm not sure I'm making the right choices, he said. Alicia looked up, concern crossing her features. About which school? You've got time to decide, Elijah. All of them would be lucky to have you. Not just about school, about everything. He gestured vaguely around them. This apartment, the trust, all of it. What if we're using this opportunity? Wrong? His mother studied him carefully. What's brought this on? Elijah hadn't told her about the overheard conversation between Catherine and Richard, or about the subsequent revelations regarding Catherine's motivations. But now, the full story spilled out. The doubled grant amount, the personal funds, the connection to James's illness. She had her own reasons for helping us, he concluded. It wasn't just about me or my potential. It was about her son, her need, to create something positive when she felt powerless. Alicia absorbed this information silently, her expression thoughtful. Does that change the opportunity itself? She finally asked. Doesn't it? Elijah countered. If it was partially luck, not just merit, if I was chosen partly because I reminded her of James, then maybe I don't deserve all this. Few people deserve the circumstances they're born into, good or bad, his mother said. You didn't deserve the hardships we faced before, and maybe you didn't earn this windfall in the way you thought, but that doesn't mean you can't deserve it through what you do with it. The wisdom in her words resonated, yet didn't fully resolve his disquiet. I keep thinking about what Grandma May would say. A soft smile touched Alicia's face. She'd say that blessings don't need to be earned, but they do need to be honored. The conversation marked a turning point in Elijah's approach to his new circumstances. Rather than focusing on whether he deserved what he had received, he began to consider how he could honor the opportunity, how he could justify it through his choices and actions. This shift in perspective coincided with increasing tension at the Chamberlain Foundation. Richard's concerns about Catherine's management had spread to other board members, and Elijah began noticing strained interactions during the meetings he observed. Catherine maintained her composure publicly, but in their private sessions, her fatigue and frustration were increasingly evident. "The Foundation's annual review is next week," she told him during one such meeting. "Richard has been lobbying board members. He's positioning this as a referendum on my leadership." "Because of me?" Elijah asked, the weight of responsibility heavy in his chest. "Because of many things," Catherine corrected. "Your grant is just a convenient example. Richard has always believed he should have had more control after Edward died. This is as much about family dynamics as foundation management. What can I do?" The question came instinctively. An offer of support for the woman who had transformed his life, regardless of her initial motivations. Catherine seemed surprised by the offer. "This isn't your battle, Elijah. The board politics won't affect your trust. It's not about the money," he insisted. "It's about you. If you're being challenged because of decisions you made then I'm already involved." She considered him with a new appreciation. "There is something, perhaps. The board reviews the impact of our investments annually. If you were willing to present what you've done with the opportunity so far, what you plan for the future, it might help contextualize my decision." "I can do that," Elijah agreed immediately, though as soon as the words left his mouth, doubt followed. What had he really accomplished in the months since receiving the trust? He had moved to a better apartment, applied to prestigious colleges, established a modest community fund. Were these achievements significant enough to justify Catherine's extraordinary investment? The question haunted him as he began preparing for the board presentation. What could he say that would validate Catherine's faith in him? How could he demonstrate that her investment, personal and professional, was yielding meaningful returns? As the date approached, Elijah found himself increasingly anxious. He drafted and redrafted his remarks, sought input from his mother, rehearsed in front of mirrors. Nothing seemed adequate to the task. The night before the presentation, he sat at his desk surrounded by discarded attempts, a familiar sense of inadequacy creeping over him despite his transformed circumstances. His phone chimed, with a text from James Chamberlain. "Good luck tomorrow. Mum's worried. Don't screw it up." The blunt message startled a laugh from Elijah, momentarily breaking his spiral of self-doubt. He responded, "Thanks for the pressure. How's the space research going?" They had maintained contact since their initial meeting, an unexpected friendship developing through texts and occasional visits. James's health had stabilized, allowing him to pursue his astronomical interests with renewed energy. "Light pollution sucks in Manhattan," came the quick reply. "Been thinking about that community fund of yours. Ever consider putting a telescope in that Oakwood place?" The casual suggestion triggered something in Elijah's mind, not just about telescopes, but about vision, perspective, and what it meant to truly see beyond immediate circumstances. An idea began to form, nebulous at first, but rapidly gaining definition and momentum. He reached for a fresh notebook, different from the formal presentation materials he had been struggling with. At the top of the page, he wrote, "The Franklin Initiative for Community Transformation." For the next several hours, Elijah wrote feverishly, outlining a vision that extended far beyond the modest community fund he had initially established. This wasn't about dispensing charity to Oakwood Heights. It was about creating a sustainable model for community-driven change, with education, entrepreneurship, and environmental justice at its core. The plan drew on everything he had learned through his 17 years in Oakwood, the strengths often overlooked by outsiders, the challenges that required structural rather than individual solutions, the wisdom of residents like Mr. Patterson, who had witnessed decades of promised revitalization that mainly served to displace long-time community members. It incorporated elements of the Chamberlain Foundation's approach, strategic investment in human potential, Butte reconfigured to operate at a community rather than individual level. It would require partnerships, research, sustained commitment. It was ambitious, perhaps audaciously so for someone his age, but as the plan took shape on paper, Elijah felt a clarity and purpose that had eluded him since the day Catherine had first made her offer. This wasn't about proving he deserved $2 million. It was about transforming an accident opportune into intentional impact, about honoring the opportunity through vision and commitment. When dawn broke, Elijah had the outline of something that felt right, not just as a presentation to save Catherine's position, but as a genuine direction for his life. Whether the Chamberlain Foundation Board would see its value remained to be seen, But for the first time since learning the complicated truth behind his selection, Elijah felt he was writing his own story, rather than merely responding to circumstances beyond his control. He showered, changed into the suit Catherine had helped him select months earlier, and gathered his notes. Today would either validate Catherine's investment in him or mark the beginning of her professional downfall. Their responsibility was enormous. But as Elijah left the apartment, his mother's encouraging words following him, he felt ready to face whatever outcome awaited at the Foundation headquarters. It was time to transform potential into purpose and opportunity into action. The Chamberlain Foundation's boardroom occupied the top floor of their headquarters, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the city stretching in all directions. The massive table at its center, crafted from a single slab of polished walnut, seated the 12 board members whose collective decision-making guided the Foundation's considerable resources. Elijah arrived 30 minutes early, using the time to set up his materials and center himself. Catherine found him there, reviewing his notes one final time. "Are you ready?" she asked, her usual composure in place, though the slight tension around her eyes betrayed her anxiety. "As ready as I'll ever be," Elijah replied, straightening his tie, still an unfamiliar sensation against his neck, despite the past months of accelerated adaptation to more formal environments. "The board members will begin arriving soon. Richard always comes early to—" She paused as the boardroom door opened, revealing her brother-in-law. Richard Chamberlain's expression tightened momentarily at the sight of them together, then smoothed into professional neutrality. "Catherine, Mr. Franklin." He nodded to each in turn. "I didn't realize you would be part of today's proceedings." "Elijah will be presenting an impact report on his initiative," Catherine replied evenly. "I felt the board should hear directly from one of our beneficiaries." Richard's gaze shifted to Elijah, assessing. "Interesting choice. I look forward to your presentation, Mr. Franklin." The subtle emphasis on his name carried unmistakable skepticism. Before Elijah could respond, the door opened again as board members began arriving. Corporate executives, philanthropists, academics, all wielding influence in their respective fields. Catherine made introductions, and Elijah shook hands with each arrival, conscious of being evaluated with every interaction. Dr. Helena Sorensen, a distinguished economist who had known Edward Chamberlain for decades. Marcus Wells, CEO of a technology company Edward had mentored in its early stages. Judge Mariana Cortez, whose work in restorative justice had made her a natural addition to the Foundation's leadership. By 10 o'clock, all 12 board members were seated, with Catherine at the head of the table and Richard positioned strategically at the opposite end. Elijah sat to Catherine's right, acutely aware of being the youngest person in the room by at least 2 decades. "Thank you all for coming," Catherine began, her voice carrying the practiced authority of someone accustomed to commanding such spaces. "As you know, today's meeting focuses on our annual portfolio review and impact assessment. Before we begin the formal evaluation, I've invited Elijah Franklin to share insights from his experience as a Quantum Leap recipient." Richard leaned forward slightly. "While I'm sure Mr. Franklin's perspective is valuable, I must question the procedural irregularity. Beneficiaries don't typically address the board directly. There's no prohibition against it," Judge Cortez noted. "And I, for one, would find it illuminating to hear from someone directly impacted by our work." Murmurs of agreement circulated the table, and Richard subsided, though his expression remained skeptical. Catherine nodded to Elijah. "The floor is yours." Standing to address the room, Elijah felt a momentary surge of the same anxiety that had plagued him during debate competitions, the awareness of being judged, evaluated, potentially found wanting. But beneath that familiar nervousness was something new, conviction in the vision he had crafted through the night. "Thank you for allowing me to speak today," he began, making eye contact with each board member in turn. "My name is Elijah Franklin. 8 months ago, I was a high school student working part-time at a corner store in Oakwood Heights, helping my mother make ends meet after my grandmother's passing left us with medical debt. Today, I stand before you as the recipient of the Chamberlain Foundation's most significant Quantum Leap grant to date." He paused, acknowledging the elephant in the room. "I'm aware that the size of my grant, $2 million rather than the standard $1 million, has raised questions about allocation of resources and decision-making processes. These are legitimate concerns for any organization entrusted with fulfilling a specific mission." Richard's eyebrows rose slightly at this. Direct acknowledgement. "What I hope to convey today," Elijah continued, "is not why I deserve this extraordinary opportunity, but rather how I intend to honor it. How this investment is already generating returns that extend far beyond my individual circumstances." He moved to the presentation materials he had prepared, bringing up the first slide showing Oakwood Heights, not the sanitized version that might appear in development proposals, but honest images of both its challenges and its strengths. Community gardens beside abandoned lots, children playing on streets with boarded storefronts, neighborhood elders sharing wisdom on worn stoops. This is where I come from. A community rich in resilience, wisdom, and potential, but historically underserved by traditional investment models. When Ms. Chamberlain offered me the Quantum Leap grant, my first instinct was to use it for individual advancement, college, career, personal security. But as I've reflected on this opportunity, I've come to believe that the greatest return on your investment will come not from what I personally achieve, but from how I can amplify the foundation's impact through community-centered transformation. For the next 20 minutes, Elijah outlined his vision for the Franklin Initiative, a comprehensive approach to community development that would leverage the foundation's investment to create sustainable change in Oakwood Heights and potentially serve as a model for similar communities. The plan involved establishing a community development corporation that would create pathways to home ownership for residents, support local entrepreneurship through microloans and business education, expand educational opportunities through scholarships and enrichment programs, and address environmental justice issues that had long plagued the neighborhood. What makes this approach different, Elijah explained, is that it's designed by and for the community, with accountability to the people most affected by its outcomes. It transforms a single investment in one individual into a catalyst for collective advancement. As he spoke, Elijah noticed shifts in the room's energy. Several board members were taking notes. Dr. Sorensen was nodding thoughtfully. Even Richard's skepticism seemed to have given way to reluctant interest. I recognize that I'm 17 years old, proposing an ambitious vision to people with decades more experience, Elijah acknowledged as he neared his conclusion. But I believe the Chamberlain Foundation selected me not despite me youth, but because of the perspective it provides. The ability to see both what is and what could be, without the constraints of how things have always been done. He turned to Catherine, then back to the board. Ms. Chamberlain saw potential in me when others might have seen just another kid from a struggling neighborhood. Whether that choice was strategic brilliance or an intuitive leap of faith isn't for me to say, but I intend to validate that choice through impact that extends far beyond my individual success. Judge Cortez was the first to speak after Elijah concluded. This is remarkably comprehensive for someone your age. Have you consulted with urban planning experts? Not yet, Elijah admitted, but I've lived the reality of development projects that happen to communities rather than with them. The technical expertise is essential, but so is the lived experience that informs this approach. Dr. Sorensen leaned forward. The intergenerational wealth-building component is particularly interesting. Have you modeled the economic impacts? Preliminarily, Elijah said, directing them to the relevant section of his proposal. I would welcome more rigorous analysis. Questions continued, probing, substantive inquiries that tested both the vision itself and Elijah's understanding of its complexities. He answered as candidly as possible, acknowledging limitations in his knowledge while demonstrating a grasp of fundamental principles that belied his age and formal education. Throughout the exchange, Richard remained largely silent, observing, rather than challenging directly. When the questions finally subsided, he spoke. I appreciate Mr. Franklin's presentation, he said carefully. It demonstrates thoughtfulness and ambition. However, it doesn't address the procedural concern that brought us here today, Catherine's unilateral decision to double the standard grant amount without board consultation. The room tensed at this direct confrontation. Catherine remained composed. The Quantum Leap program guidelines establish $1 million as a baseline, not a ceiling. The founding documents give the executive director discretion to adjust amounts based on potential impact. A discretion that has never been exercised to this extent, Richard countered. Perhaps it should have been, Dr. Sorensen interjected. Having heard Mr. Franklin's vision, I find myself wondering if $1 million would have been sufficient to generate the comprehensive approach he's outlined. Richard shifted tactics. The proposal is compelling on paper, but we're talking about entrusting millions of dollars to a teenager with no track record in community development. With respect, sir, Elijah said, finding his voice despite the intimidating context. The Franklin Initiative isn't about me managing millions single-handedly. It's about creating governance structures that combine community wisdom with professional expertise. My role would be as connector and advocate, not unilateral decision-maker. A mature perspective, Judge Cortez noted approvingly. Marcus Wells, who had been quiet throughout, finally spoke. I'm reminded of something Edward used to say. The safest investment is often the one that makes everyone nervous. He believed that transformative impact requires courage, the willingness to back vision that challenges conventional thinking. He looked directly at Richard. Your brother backed a 19-year-old college dropout who everyone said was too inexperienced to succeed. That was me, 30 years ago. My company now employs thousands and has changed its industry. Edward saw potential where others saw only risk. A weighted silence followed this reminder of the Foundation's founder and his philosophy. Richard's expression tightened, personal loss and professional disagreement visibly at war in his features. I don't question Mr. Franklin's intelligence or intentions, he finally said. I question whether Catherine's judgment in this case was shaped by personal factors rather than strategic assessment. Every decision we make is shaped by personal factors, Catherine replied evenly. Edward understood that. Human judgment isn't an algorithmic process that can be divorced from experience and intuition. Yes, meeting Elijah coincided with a difficult period in my personal life, but recognizing his potential, that was consistent with this Foundation's core mission and values. She turned to address the entire board. I stand by my decision to invest in Elijah Franklin at twice our usual amount. Based on what you've heard today, I believe that investment is already demonstrating extraordinary potential for impact. The tension in the room was palpable as board members exchanged glances, silently assessing the situation and their positions. Elijah felt suspended between worlds. The Oakwood Heights teenager who had never imagined sitting at such a table, and the emerging leader he was being asked to become. Dr. Sorensen broke the silence. I move that we formally approve the Franklin initiative as presented, with appropriate oversight structures and benchmarks for evaluation. Seconded, Judge Cortez said immediately. This requires further study, Richard objected. We can't approve a completely new initiative on the basis of a single presentation. Not approving the full initiative today, Dr. Sorensen clarified, rather endorsing its development with appropriate due diligence, and in doing so, implicitly affirming Catherine's judgment in selecting Mr. Franklin for the enhanced grant. The implication was clear. This vote would function as both practical approval of Elijah's vision and symbolic referendum on Catherine's leadership. All in favor? Catherine asked, her voice steady. Hands rose around the table. First Dr. Sorensen and Judge Cortez, then Marcus Wells, followed by others until 10 of the 12 board members had indicated their support. Richard and one ally remained opposed, their abstention a silent protest but insufficient to block the overwhelming consensus. Motion carries, Catherine announced, the barest hint of relief softening her professional demeanor. Mr. Franklin, the board endorses your vision and looks forward to working with you to develop it fully. As the meeting transitioned to other agenda items, Elijah felt a profound shift, not just in the immediate outcome that had secured Catherine's position, but in his own relationship to his circumstances. He had entered the room as a beneficiary, defined primarily by what he had received. He was leaving as a collaborator and visionary, defined by what he intended to create. Outside the boardroom, Catherine briefly squeezed his hand. Thank you, she whispered, not just for today, but for becoming exactly the kind of leader Edward believed in. Someone who transforms opportunity into impact. Elijah nodded, words momentarily inadequate to express the complexity of what had just occurred. As he gathered his materials, his phone vibrated with a text from James. How'd it go? Mom still employed? The ordinary teenage humor in the midst of such a pivotal moment almost made Elijah laugh. He typed back, mission accomplished, your mum is safe, and I think I just found my life's work. James's response came seconds later. Cool, no pressure. Or anything. Stepping into the elevator, Elijah felt the weight of both accomplishment and responsibility. The path ahead would be challenging, translating vision into reality always was.